So we have the 47 to 53 Chevrolet half-ton 5-window pickup, 4 body styles based on the first generation FJ40 and relative Land Cruisers, and then the first gen Ford Broncos. The production models go anywhere from about 280 to 400.
Think of the people you interact with every day. Would you want to spend a day in a canoe with them? Hi, I'm Nathan Mersereau, CEO of Planning Alternatives. We're a disruptive brand in the financial planning space with a point of view that true wealth has nothing to do with money. Growing up in a small town in Canada, I experienced examples of families with money and without. It started me on this journey of understanding wealth and the idea that spending a day in a canoe with someone could be one of the best investments you could make. Join me as I sit down with leaders, entrepreneurs, creatives, rule breakers, and friends to discover their perspective of true wealth. And maybe you'll start to shift yours.
This is the good juice of
You
conversation.
know, the land here is just so phenomenal. And I'm in retail therapy and consuming less and making more. And I make all my own clothes and stuff anyway, so I don't really need to be buying crap. So I'm like, I'm going to load up a good audiobook and hit the road. So it was great. Day before yesterday, I went north and through the park. That was magic. Got pretty deeply lost on purpose. I got an app for that, fortunately. Saw a bear pooping. And by the way, they don't use bunnies. So there goes that myth, or at least California, that's what we thought. And then yesterday, I did a 6-hour jaunt through farmland in Idaho. And it was lovely. And a great audiobook experience.
So what did that do for your soul?
Too much noise where I live, and a lot of it, I would say, post-COVID.
And where are you living?
So I live in Southern California. I live in Los Angeles. And it used to be wonderful. I don't like it anymore. I just don't. There's too much strife and too much divide and just too much input. So my backyard's magic. I love that. But it's the training version of the Dream 20 acre, which apparently I can't afford around here. Holy heck. I was looking around at properties. Okay, maybe not yet. But anyway,
there is an extra 0 or 2.
Oh yeah,
it seems to be confusing.
Yeah,
but it's real.
But to answer your question, clear in the head, the depth of the landscape, the sense of perspective and other priorities and lifestyles, and something about a river in me. Just that's always been like my happy Zen space. So like getting off grid and just stumbling into a crazy river where you can just see the fish. It wasn't even that it was clear. It was like it just wasn't there. It was like fish floating. And just turn the engine off, sit on the tailgate, enjoy the time. It was great. Don't tell my wife because I told her I'm working really hard here.
You are.
Yeah. But yes.
We have pictures of you working really, really hard. Tell listeners about the story of Icon 4x4 and how that evolved.
So I'm like a serial craftsman. I just love learning, especially lost arts, and trying to revive them and keep them relevant. Cars design started as a hobby as a teenager because it was such an interesting, extroverted, cohesive combination of so many different art forms with leather and textile and color theory and woodwork and on, plus the challenge of all the engineering. And I had a completely different career path, so did my wife. I was in the entertainment industry, she was in the music industry. Neither of us liked it. And we were actually on a vacation in South Africa and decided when we get home, we'd quit our jobs. So we turned my hobby into a business. And that hobby business transition started as a $1,000 bet in a business class at USC with a professor and another student. I was like, you know, this new internet thing, supply and demand could be turned on its head, because if you can control the supply, now you have the ability to create demand. They poo-pooed it, and then they said, all right, $1,000 bet. You have 6 months to drive a trackable market up 30 points. So at that time I was on hiatus from my job, so road trip. So throughout the Southwest, and just always loved the old Toyota Land Cruisers, but in America, only like other travel geeks got it. Otherwise it was that Toyota or Jeep. People just really weren't applying the simple restoration skills they'd apply to a Mustang or a Mercedes or what have you. So I just traveled around and bought up all the best ones I could find, chipmunked them, dialed them in, and put them back on the market. I went back to collect on the bet. They're like, we were joking. So you might have been joking, but this beats a real job. So that was our first brand, TLC, which we now relocated to Charlotte, North Carolina. And that does just vintage Toyota Land Cruiser.
And what year did that start? What's your timeline in the...
That started, I was kind of house under the radar, illegal for a couple of years. I went legit in 94. And then that business really got quite fortunate with the timing of the internet. It turned out to be true with, I could be very subspecialist and could find an audience. So that continued to grow. And then I was asked by Toyota to do the first 3 pre-production vehicles that eventually became the FJ Cruiser.
Is this where Mr. Toyota?
Yeah,
With
Akio. Yeah, it was pretty nuts. It turned out, I guess we had a mutual friend, I guess was on one of his boards. And he said, I'm going to connect you guys. And I'm like, guys, what guy? So sure enough, the phone call comes into the shop and it's Mr. Toyota. I didn't even know there was a Mr. Toyota at that time. So I was like, it was like God calling the church. He came down with a bunch of suits to visit us. And I think, frankly, because our mutual friend had a bunch of our restored 60s and 70s Land Cruisers. And for Japanese culture, especially Japanese business culture, you never talk about your past successes. You never rest on your laurels. Slogans for the brand like moving forward and all of that, they're quite literal. To him, the idea that some crazy American was disassembling and painstakingly putting back together and restoring old Toyotas, and the fact that other crazy Americans would actually pay for it, just rocked his head. It just went against so many things. But at that time, they were starting to entertain the concept of the FJ Cruiser, and they wanted to make sure it had at least some sort of DNA or tie to the original. And I guess I was the biggest geek in the space, and it turned out to be a pretty phenomenal experience. I got to go to some of their factories globally. And then after that job, they took it to their focus groups in CalT, the California Design Studio, and they turned it into sort of Xbox modern, and a lot of what I wanted to see it be, I understood they couldn't. So it inspired me to take the profits from that job and this new perspective and a couple of new emerging technologies and software to revisit the original FJ40 my way. So as soon as I wrapped that job, I doubled down and spent all that money again and sequestered just 2 employees in a little back part of our shop and just built it because it was in my head. Like it was a 3D model I could see at night and keep me up. And like I do that often. And then that's when I know I have to tangibly, physically make it or lose my mind. So we finished the first one, no SWOT analysis, nothing other than the gut of wanting to see it done. Then went back and added up the cost. I was like, oh, shit. No one's going to buy this. This is nuts. And coincidentally, Mickey Drexler, the mutual friend with Akio Toyoda, is the first guy I called because he's always been just so kind to me, and he's like brand brilliant. And he's the kind of guy who gives you a knee-jerk answer, and he's right, and he'll stick to it. So I was like, I could, instead of hand bodying it in aluminum, I guess I could do fiberglass. I guess I could cut back this cost and that. And he's no, don't do it. If you build it, they will come. And the way your brain works, I know you well enough, you're going to lose interest if you don't stay pure to why you want to build it. And thankfully they came. Yeah. So now our clients have actually pushed us north to expand with more options and more content, and not like bling superfluous creature comforts, although the perversions of modernity do creep in, at least with like reverse cameras and heated seats and good stereos and stuff. But yeah, it's been a wild ride. So Icon is 20 years old as of January, and it's been pretty wild.
What do you see in the people who are purchasing your vehicles? What's their why? What's the unmet need that they're finding fulfillment in when they experience your vehicles?
I think there's a lot of romance and nostalgia. Either they had, or dad had, or grandma had, or the girl or boy that got away had this vehicle that they have a lot of emotional memories and relationships with. But in some cases, they've hunted one down. Unless you're like hardcore into it, after even 4 or 5 miles in a vehicle from decades gone by, it involves a fair amount of martyrdom. They don't steer well, they don't stop well, they don't accelerate well. And I think a lot of times the rosy eyes of memory get real clear real quick, and people are like, darn it. And then they get rid of it. When people discover Icon and they, in essence, can, to simplify, get the best of both worlds, get the safety and the comfort and the efficiency, relative efficiency for 2-ton toaster that most of our vehicles are. But they can be time and space and place, which also relates to where they're going to use it. So a lot of times, like this area is a great example, our clients will maybe seasonally live here, but they'll have a big ranch and they want to use and explore the ranch, and they want the vehicle to be the gateway for their fly fishing or whatever it is they're into. It enables that without looking like a schmo driving around in a G-Wagon or something and just not being part of the vibe. So these trucks, if anything, you'll get a thumbs up, or they'll be flat out invisible. And the passenger cars as well. The derelicts being the deeper end of that pond, whereas a lot of people look at those and just cannot get their head around why on earth would I spend all this money for something that looks like crap.
Tell us about the derelict.
Yeah, taking the sort of Japanese aesthetic principles of wabi-sabi, of timer, natural finishes, and imperfections that are perfect, and every scratch, every bump, every dent tells a story. We offer a derelict version of all of our vehicles, if we can find the right vehicle, where we will leave the original bent chrome bumpers and all the original paint and exterior trim. And so if you see it on the side of the street, it'll just look like an old car. And if it's a popular model, that's one thing. If it's an orphan or forgotten car, it's a whole nother vibe. But it literally will look like maybe it runs. But then you'll see it blow by you on the freeway doing 90 because it's have modern suspension and Brembo brakes and modern suspension and emissions control and copious horsepower and on. And then we basically disassemble them. If it's a one-off, we'll disassemble the body, put it on a fixture, laser scan it, get it into CAD, convert the mesh to surface data. So then we have control over the physical footprint and constraints. Then we'll engineer a chassis from scratch. We'll emulate that in the software to understand the scrub rate and the ride dynamics. And all before this, too, is a deep dive, if the client has the attention span, of how you're going to use it, where you're going to use it. Do you want it to be a wolf in sheep's clothing? Do you want it to be chilled? Do you want to scare small children when you floor it? Do you want to be completely silent and under the radar? And do a deep dive of what they dig. And then consider that in all the engineering and cosmetics. So the inside we'll completely geek out on, in modern seating, modern ergonomics, seat heaters, and soundproofing, and high-end textiles. And I do leather work and apparel design. So I generally don't use transportation resources because they're so commoditized. But what I do is already so inefficient that if we pick a textile that's $200 a yard versus $20 a yard, no one really cares. And it really elevates it. So they're my favorite of the builds because there's so much creativity in them.
And what's the price range, low to high end?
So production icons, we have 3 models that we've done hundreds of. So we have the 47 to 53 Chevrolet half-ton 5-window pickup, 4 body styles based on the first generation FJ40 and relative Land Cruisers, and then the first gen Ford Broncos. The production models go anywhere from about 280 to 400, and then we do really nutty one and dones where we'll build it one time and all engineering, all design, everything will never repeat. So that's a singular sort of rolling sculpture, and these are poetic words because they're brutally expensive. and crap business, to be frank. We'd be wiser to just do the production. But it's like client-funded skunk works in that we get to explore all sorts of new, be it electric powertrains or be it a new platform or a new manner of integration, and that's super fun.
What advice would you give to the person who's listening is like, wow, I want to have my icon story evolve, but they're at this tension point between creativity and efficacy of idea and the business and the finances? Like, how do you balance that?
Well, if I know, I'm still doing that dance. No, straight answer. First is you got to find your passion, I think. Respect that passion. Protect it with everything, above everything. Like I've turned down licensing or collab deals that would have looked great on the P&L and probably given me quicker personal wealth. But at the same time, I got into this because of a deep geekness and passion for design and a unique perspective of how I saw what could be done that no one was doing in that manner. But starting over again right now because I realize I'm spoiled by the success of Icon and people take my call or search us out, etc. But then I'm dumb. So I started a new apparel brand and a new leather goods brand, spaces where I really have no name. And boy, wow, the game's changed. I really feel Icon happened like organically. So I took out an SBA loan. Then I was lucky to pay that off super quick. The first 10 years of the business, more than 10. Reinvest, hardly taking, floating the mortgage and no travel, double down. Didn't help that we had 2 kids during that time. But now that I'm starting over again in new segments of design, I'm finding it super frustrating. Even to get followers, like everything's so gamified, what I feel used to be much more honestly organic as far as really a digital progression of the tradition of word of mouth. It's not there now. It's now become rev models for marketing firms or media platforms, etc. I'm like, oh, darn it. This wasn't that hard before.
Do you feel that artists or creatives have to sell their soul?
No. But I do think, like the space Icon is in, when we started it, this space did not exist. And all of our traditional, either hot rod or concourse classic car restoration community friends, they all thought we were nuts. It turned out they had a pool bet on the wall for $20 a square for which month we would tank. And none of them are still in business, and here we are partying on. But I do think one thing I lacked the foresight or wisdom to consider early on that I would speak to for others is set your expectations in that I just, as a 7th generation American, my ancestors were mostly crabbers and fishermen on the Chesapeake. My dad was the first to go to college. He got his law degree as captain of the Coast Guard. They went from a very small town to another small town and wanted to make sure my sister and I got exposed to more culture and diversity than they had. So I got quite lucky in that my godmother was Senator Monroney's wife. So every 3rd week we would go stay with her in DC, and we'd go to the Kennedy Center, we'd go to Smithsonian, we started to get exposed. And one of those early trips was Mikhail Baryshnikov's first U.S. performance. And because of her standing in that community, got to go backstage and meet him, and met him. And the first thing he asked me is, do you dance ballet? I was like a small town 7-year-old. It was like the last thing on my mind. And I said, no, sir. He's like, why? The only thing I could think of, because it was a legitimate excuse for why I failed at Boy Scouts and every other relative sport, I said, oh, I'm too short. Apparently that is the wrong thing to say to Mikhail, because he then sponsored me and paid for my dance education with the Repertory Dance Theater. And then from that, we ended up in New York City with a friend who was going to a big audition. And I had no aspirations, but I was never good at being a kid. And I realized in theater and in dance, had such a great opportunity to be seen as an equal with grownups. Mm. So it turned out that audition he was going to do was like an open cattle call, so any idiot could sign up. I was bored, so I signed my name on the list. I copied everyone else, and ended up getting it. And it turned out that we did a national tour, and then it was on Broadway for a year and a half. So this career just sort of organically snowballed from that. And I don't know how I got on this tangent, but related to lack of foresight, perhaps. With Icon now, it's a fairly large beast, and there's a lot of moving parts. I knew to build a master alliance, in the words of Napoleon Hill, surround myself with people with other skill sets. Put me in front of a spreadsheet, forget about it. Like, I am totally the creative tard and coming up with product designs and concepts and pairings, but I lack the business structure intellect despite my efforts to study it. I have no real degrees in anything. I just do night school or YouTube or read or listen. But I built a team, and it made the absolute world of difference, because my wife and I have worked together since we started both companies, and I'm blessed in that hasn't been wrought with the sort of marital drama I've seen with several who work together. So that was never an issue, but we were both wearing 20 hats. Maybe 5 of them look good on us or fit us well. So being able to really, even if you have to give up a piece of the company before you can afford to pay to hire the right perspectives and intellects, man, build that team. Or go, you know what? This is my little art happy space. I'm only going to do X amount of volume, and don't create a monster. But I think there should be more thought in that early on in the development of product or brand. Same decision with, are you going to do it all yourself and be responsible for families and teams and machinery and insurance and HR and workman's comp and blah, 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 blah. Or are you going to do tech packs and send it overseas? And then if you're going overseas, are you going to take a race to the bottom? I am a firm believer in that. No, because it's the big boys that are going to race further to the volume. So you're going to lose at your own game and have no margin. So respect that original perspective, love the craft, honor it, and then structure it. Do you subcontract it? Hopefully keep it domestic if you can find the artisans. Or do you want to build a monster and be responsible for the whole beast? So with Icon, I'm happy to be responsible for the whole beast. We're about 60 people, 100,000 square feet. The business culture, let's call it, in California is unsustainable. We need to move. We have significant back order and opportunities and untapped brand equity that we haven't engaged in, and we're going to have to move to do that. These other brands, I was like, no, actually, I know Italy's the only spot for the best possible traditional quality in leatherwork. So I hunted down the right manufacturer, and I designed and handmade like the first 50 of every product. Went there, hand selected everything, but I subcontracted that. That could be a 5-person company with significant revenue if I can learn how to break the retail game and get eyes on the product. And then apparel, I went even more abstract and said, nah, it's all vintage findings. It's all vintage blankets and Pendletons and Beacons and Chimayos. So it's eminently not scalable. And then I grade, pattern, and stitch everything myself. And it's cheaper than a psychotherapist. And what do? 200, 300 units a year. But I'm not looking to make a career out of it. But it does basically fund my vintage belt buckle habit. That's about it.
Good to have good habits.
No, and
habits that get funded.
And using your brain and your, like, the more senses you can engage together, I honestly think from the perspective of how you look at wealth management in a broader sense, I think I'm a hell of a lot happier than a lot of wealthier people. Although
Why is that? And what's true wealth mean to you?
True wealth to me is staying connected with all of your senses and creating something tangible, something physical. Now, sometimes that can be a career path. Sometimes it's fine. Be a bond trader, be a short seller, then go home and get in the garage and find your soul that way. So people can find it however they wish. For me, I guess I'm a little piggy in that I'm still trying to find it all together, meaning taking pride in what I can design and realize and create, finding a community that can afford to pay for it and really appreciates it more than can pay for it and is getting it because their car friends said it's the thing to get, I take their business. I'm not an idiot. But most of our clients are more likely in construction or architecture, or they're self-made. It could be Amazon, but they're self-made. They bootstrapped up. It's not like new money or celebrity, because what I produce, everything I produce, isn't a sort of bling bling extroverted, yo, look at me. It's not new money. It's not extroverted in that sense. It's design distinct. It says this person has a unique way of looking at things, but it's not like in your face wealth.
It's almost like, if this might be oversimplifying it, but you're crafting humanity. You're saying this is a reflection of a person's interest.
Ooh, that's beautiful. I like that. Crafting humanity. That's good. I might steal that.
Done.
The best I was ever able to boil it down was we revisit classic transportation in a modern context. But often by the time I'm done with that sentence, I'm just getting a blank stare. Like people are like, okay. Crafting humanity. Yeah, that's good.
Food for thought. How about we wrap up our conversation in the derelict?
Sure.
And thanks for sharing your story thus far.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review. To discover what wealth means to you, please take our assessment at planningalt.com.